which being excellent to eat, she gazed at and did not eat. In the world to come, a person will be asked to give an account for that which being excellent to eat, she gazed at or looked at and didn't eat. Well, the idea is that in Judaism, God provides things that are meant to be enjoyed. And if you don't take advantage of that, you're going to have to explain to God after your life why you spent your life not enjoying the things that God provided for you to enjoy in responsible ways. And that's really it. That's what it means. So, I advertised today's program by explaining that Jewish people, since I was asked to talk about Jewish texts on female sexuality, Jews are supposed to responsibly, and we can talk about what responsible behavior is considered, are supposed to responsibly celebrate themselves as sexual beings. To reject or deny oneself or one's partner the experience of pleasure in ways that reflect the image of God is an insult to God. And God, who created the female body and the male body in ways that can experience pleasure, intended for pleasure to be experienced responsibly. And so that's it. That's sort of the idea. A little personal note, if I may. Sex was the first subject I remember learning about from my mother, which is kind of unusual. I was 4 years old. My mother was 80 years old and locked herself in a closet one day to die. And she knew that she was bleeding to death, and she didn't want to ruin her mother's carpeting. That night, she stayed in the closet all day long, and that night, when she didn't show up for dinner, her older brother, to whom she was very close, had been frantically looking for her. And he went to this room and opened the door and found her cowering in the closet and shaking. And he scooped her up and he gave her a hug and he explained menstruation. Her mother had not told her what menstruation was, and she knew that she was simply bleeding to death. She had never heard of it. So when Dalila suggested this topic, I added this story because the notion of, in Bosnian, muffled screams is how I envision my mother standing in that closet as a little girl. So she made sure I understood everything way before I asked. This is Marc Chagall's rendering of the book of Exodus, where the Hebrew midwives, the book of Exodus opens with the midwives to the Hebrew women being ordered to kill all the male babies so the Israelites don't become, in the Hebrew Bible, don't become too numerous. And they are not willing to kill children. So here they are, and it's interesting, their arms, what does it look like they're ready to do?
Hold a baby.
Hold a baby, or catch a baby, as midwives do, or hold a baby. And also, Chagall almost always has big hands. So we have these big, big hands. And one can also perhaps imagine that they're saying, look, and that biblical text says, we try to get there, but by the time we get there, the women deliver so quickly that we can't make it in time. What can we do? So catching a baby, and what can we do? And if you look at the way Chagall has portrayed the evil Pharaoh, what do you notice about him? There are two artistic features that are kind of interesting. And the fun thing about art is there's no right answer. So whatever you say is going to be good and right. So take a chance.
There's this Nazi salute.
There's a Nazi salute. It's a Heil Hitler. And also, look at his head. His head is flattened. like he has no brain. And his arms, Chagall often removes the forearm so that the hand is pulled back and it looks kind of useless, kind of ineffective. And so I think this is a wonderful representation of the collusion that these women have with each other for the sake of saving children's lives. So this is the last one to kind of consider this idea. And when I mentioned that Chagall often removes the forearm and so the arms retract, you see him. This is one of the devices Chagall uses. The eyes are funny, the teeth are funny. And if you notice, and again, I loved Dalila's title, because if you look at the woman, she looks like what?
Like a bruise, maybe, or like a bruise, or like a tiger or something.
Yes, good. Or if we went for an animal from the sea, or a creature from the sea, like a mermaid, who can't use her, and both of these images work.
She has scales.
She has scales, and she's not able to move her legs. She's not able to walk. She's all bound up, as alas many women are, and as alas when it comes to their sexuality, many women are. So I thought we would just start off with these ideas, and what I did from here was take what I think are sort of 10 principles or 10 commandments regarding sexuality, and paired it with each one with a text and each one with art that we can look at. And so, again, there's a principle to think about, or a commandment that would represent women's sexuality or could be connected to that, some art, and the text itself. So, I wanted to introduce it. There's a wonderful biblical artist, Janet Schaffner, who, alas, died 4 years ago. I can't believe it. And she said, "For a long time, I've been fascinated by how the dramatic events in the lives of our biblical ancestors have striking parallels to events in contemporary life, from family jealousy and murder to mob rape and ethnic cleansing, from sexual obsession to enduring love. Everything that touches us deeply has an archetypal occurrence in the Bible. In these paintings, I have tried to make these connections visual." And what I've done here, this is her painting of Adam and Eve. And I'm interested in just how you see it.
They are made for pleasure.
Yes, it caused us to make us avail ourselves of the pleasures that are provided. So it's the same theme from the first text.
Exactly, we have the responsibility to enjoy everything God.
Yes, responsibly, and with the respect for people in mind, but not to deny oneself pleasure. And that really is the case with a Jewish view of sex. And I took something from a very famous American artist, Judy Chicago, a feminist who did one of the... are any of you familiar with Judy Chicago or heard the name?
Yeah.
She did a very famous installation piece called The Dinner Party. Yes, and it was really a thrilling piece. Took up an entire room. A triangle with a place setting for famous women in history from all over the world.
There's no main person on the front of the table, but everyone has a similar, the same amount of space on the table.
It was quite remarkable, and it was in the, she did it in the, produced it in the 70s, and it's quite remarkable. She did, this is from her series Song of Songs, and she did this after having done a Holocaust project, and she wrote art on the Holocaust. She wrote that she was so bereft and so depressed after producing Holocaust art, she went from there to the Song of Songs, so that there was beauty and life and sexuality that had been denied so many people who had been eliminated or abused in various ways before and during the Holocaust, and in fact beyond. And she deals with the biblical line about the person being dark-skinned, which one didn't see much of in European art. And again, this isn't a criticism of European art, it's just a description of the things that we see. So today, one would make a case that we're here studying Torah, the subject of things that flow from the Bible. We, the possessors of the Holy Torah, that believe that God, may God be praised, created all, as God's wisdom decreed, and did not create anything ugly or shameful. For if sexual intercourse were repulsive, and now we're going to look at this same statement about enjoying ourselves with different words. If sexual intercourse were repulsive, then the reproductive organs are also repulsive. The Holy One, blessed be God, created them by divine word. There is nothing at all of a person's organs created flawed or ugly. Thus, everything created with divine wisdom is complete, exalted, good, and pleasant. But when a person sins, ugliness becomes attached to these matters as they were not repulsive or abhorrent originally. So one sees that in Judaism there is no such thing as original sin. People sin, but the person is not sinful, and there are ways to redeem oneself from sin. But there is no such thing as original sin. That was written in later. A third principle is know your partner. The idea of knowing somebody and knowing your partner well is important. Also, whenever you read in the Hebrew Bible in English, the word know, it always means what? Someone knew somebody else. It means what? Always. It means intercourse, always. This is not a hi, very nice to meet you handshake. This is always, to know someone in the Hebrew Bible is to have intercourse with them. So the knowing means an intellectual and spiritual intimacy combined with a sexual intimacy. Know that the union of man with his wife, and we'll talk later about other partnerships, but for now, know that the union of man with his wife is divided into two parts. Know that the sexual intercourse of man with his wife is holy and pure when done properly in the proper time and with the proper intention. No one should think that sexual intercourse is ugly and loathsome. God forbid. The basic human needs, according to Judaism, are food, clothing, and sex. We usually hear in English, I don't know about in Bosnian, we usually hear food, clothing, and shelter. Shelter and sex start with the same letter, but they're in English, but they're very different. And these are considered basic human needs and rights, which explains some of why the Jewish view of sex is as it is. And so basic human needs apply not just to the young, because usually lovers and biblical lovers are portrayed as young and juicy and all that stuff. And sexual satisfaction, according to Jewish law, is owed by the husband to his wife as long as they're married. And so if she's no longer able to bear children, you still owe her sexual pleasure. So another principle is, and I started to refer to this, be private but not prudish. Don't hold back your sexuality, but sexuality and sexual behavior is to be private. In the original language, this is understood and preceded by a whole paragraph about the prohibition on ever having sexual intercourse or any kind of sexual behavior with your wife, with anybody, and with your wife, unless she agrees to it. And she must agree every time. So you can't say, now we're married and I can have sex with you whenever I want. Even though it's the man's, the commitment, the mandate is for the man to satisfy his wife, she must agree. And lastly, I don't know here if people are familiar with Dr. Ruth. She's the premier American sex doctor, I guess they call her. And she is an advocate of cross-culturally, everyone should have a good sexual relationship, responsible, and so on. Her background is an interesting one, which we don't have time to talk about. But this is a very interesting shot of her on the holiday of Simchat Torah, when the Torah is paraded around the synagogue and people carry Jewish flags around. And this has become sort of an iconic photograph of her. She's very, very famous. Promote, and so I've sort of made a commandment, promote feminism for everyone, and consequently help protect the right to responsible and secure free expression of female sexuality, create safety for those of all sexual orientations and gender identities, LGBTQ, to which I added S. So, I took from her book, she has a book called Heavenly Sex, which is on Jewish texts about sexuality, though she's best known for, she's ubiquitous, she's everywhere in the secular world and among sex educators. And she wrote in her book, Heavenly Sex, Rabbi Simeon ben Halafta, an early sage, once described the male organ as the peacemaker of the home, lamenting the fact that with old age it had ceased functioning. This is obviously pre-Viagra. She wrote that before those drugs were available. The sages regarded it as a husband's duty to give his wife sexual pleasure, even going so far as to construct a schedule of minimal sexual activity for men of different occupations. That is not to say that they reduce sex to a rigid formula. On the contrary, they discussed ways of making it more enjoyable, encouraging both men and women to be good lovers.